It's not often that captaincy is close, but game week 10 is one of those game weeks. Last game week we captained Haaland. That was the right decision. It was also the right decision not to triple captain him. This game week he travels away to Bournemouth, which isn't too bad of a fixture. Palmer's got to travel away from home as well. He faces United. You'll be impressed with his stats in a minute. And lastly, Salah is the only player on the shortlist to have the home advantage. He faces Brighton. Starting with the non-penalty stats per 90 minutes, it's Palmer who tops the charts on both the return points and expected return points. Could you imagine projecting this a couple of seasons ago, where he'd be ahead of Haaland and Salah after 9 games? To be fair to Haaland, he is just 0.1 behind on the underlying stats, and we should see regression in Palmer's numbers. I said that about Haaland, it happened. I also said it about Salah, that's happened, just not quite as much. There has been an overperformance by all 3 players on the shortlist, which you kind of expect off these 3 players, but Palmer's right now is much more than you'd expect. I always stress how much the expected points are better at projecting the future points than the actual points themselves. We've not got any bad finishers on the shortlist. Haaland and Palmer have been expected to get similar numbers. As for Salah, his underlying stats haven't been quite as promising. Obviously, we've got quite a while to go yet. It's not the biggest of sample sizes, but 9 matches isn't too bad. And right now we can only go off the data that we've got. Salah is a little bit behind. Palmer's not only got the best non-penalty stats, he's a set-piece specialist at Chelsea, he's on penalty duties, takes direct free kicks, indirect free kicks and corners. The other 2 players do get to take pens for their respective clubs, but they only take the occasional direct free kick. Haaland does take more than Salah, especially when De Bruyne is not on the pitch. When it comes to the probability of scoring in the system, yet again, Haaland's got the highest anytime goal score odds, kind of expected from a forward, but the other 2 players aren't too bad at scoring goals either. But it's Salah who's got the highest anytime assist odds, and when you combine them both together, he's got the highest anytime return odds. I do like the fact that Haaland's odds are weighted more towards goals than what Salah's are, but when you think about it, Salah gets an additional point for every goal scored, and he's only 5% behind Haaland on the anytime goal scorer odds, and he's still 11% ahead on the anytime assister odds. I'd say Salah's got the best weighted odds. And as for Palmer, he benefits from being a midfielder as well, but he is too far behind Haaland for that to compensate. I would say Haaland's got the better odds, but Palmer's not quite as far behind Haaland as it initially seems. However, he does trail by quite a lot on the points projections, and that is on both data models. It's Salah who's got the highest on Fantasy Football Fix with 7, and he's got the highest on FPL Review with 7.5 as well. I must admit, before seeing these points projections, I thought Haaland would be a little bit higher than what he is, and I thought Palmer would be quite a bit higher than what he is as well. Nevertheless, it is a total wipeout from Salah. Let's not take anything away from him. By comparing the opposition's defensive numbers, we can see that the goals conceded have been quite similar so far this season. It is Brighton that's conceded slightly more goals than Bournemouth and United, but it's not much more. It's those underlying stats that I'm more bothered about usually, where Bournemouth's expected numbers are much worse than the other 2 opponents. I'd say Haaland's got the most difficult fixture away against Bournemouth. There's barely anything between United's and Brighton's numbers. Like I mentioned earlier, the goals conceded are slightly worse for Brighton, but by barely anything. But the expected numbers are slightly better for Brighton, but barely anything again. I would prefer those expected numbers to be higher if I'm playing against a team, just for the same reason like I mentioned earlier for the players, but realistically, there's not much between the quality of the defences. I'd say Salah has still got the easier fixture. That's of course because he's got the home advantage, and Palmer has to travel away from home to United, but I do think Palmer's got an easier fixture than Haaland. Before we conclude, we're going to carry out a quick risk assessment. Haaland and Palmer's had a week's worth of rest. They played 90 minutes in the last match, and that's quite promising. As for Salah, he played a few days before this one, but he only featured for 90 minutes in the Cup. He's got 89 expected minutes just like Palmer. Haaland's got 90, therefore they've all got reliable expected minutes, and I've not got any concerns over the fitness of any of these 3 players. When you consider every section that I've discussed up until this point, there is a real good mix between each player coming first, second and third. It is quite close between the 3 players on the shortlist. If you don't own the player that I'm about to say is the best captain, I'm going to go against the points projections and say Palmer's my second favourite option. Quite surprised at myself by that, because before the video I thought he was more of an outsider, but I have been very impressed by his numbers and of course his fixture. But for me, the player that stands out, and I do think it's slightly influenced by the home advantage, is Salah. I've got 5 flags in my team this game week and might be forced to wildcard. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss my team selection video.